Why does everyone love the asymmetric Patek 5712? Here's what's symmetrically wrong with it. First, you see the subdials are all different sizes. The centers of the subdials are not even at the center of each quadrant they're in. There's a chewed up 6 o'clock hour marker and a cut off 8 o'clock hour marker, whilst 4, 5 and 7 are missing. Plots of the minute track are also missing between the minutes of 20 and 23. The Patek Philippe Genève text seems arbitrarily placed. If it were 2 dial slats higher, that would have been more expected. Power reserve is tossed into the top left corner. Most people prefer a symmetrical object. There's an implied balance to it. Symmetry alludes to completion. Asymmetry, on the other hand, leaves a visual juxtaposition of incompleteness, which can be unpleasant to the eye. Somehow, the 5712's asymmetry just works, even though it shouldn't. Quick thanks to Ken's Watches. This piece is from their stores. Check them out at kenwatches.com or at their retail locations in Hong Kong. Now let's figure out why by understanding more about the watch. The first version of this watch was launched in 2005 and it was called the 3712. 1 year later in 2006, the 5712 and the 5711 were simultaneously launched. So this is an upgrade over the 3712. There are a few slight differences, including the case shape. It's more curved and the dial has some improvements in terms of asymmetry as well. Yes, but still this watch is getting old. Since 2006 it's been mainly the same piece, and now we're getting close to 20 years of the Patek Philippe 5712. But somehow the watch remains as new as the day it was released. It looks just as good, and that's how good the Genta design of the Nautilus is and how it withstands time. As an aside, this is really quite cool. The watch hobby is quite different from tech or even modern cars, as things don't just outdate themselves as quickly. To me, this is an extremely special piece because it's the watch that introduced me to the Patek Philippe brand. It's the first watch I saw and heard of in terms of Patek watches. So getting back to what's symmetrically wrong with it, the things I listed. Perhaps I've highlighted some things you cannot unsee, but I think it really doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the appreciation for this watch. To me, this is the best Nautilus out there. 5711, 5726, or maybe even the 5740. I get that people prefer the 5726. That's a different complication. That's symmetrical. That's a cooler complication. But to me, the way Patek made this watch with the asymmetrical aspects of the dial still so gorgeous is what makes this special. The size of this watch is what I would call sleek perfection, particularly on the wrist. The 40mm case diameter is both bigger and smaller than its stated size. So in terms of the width, it's about 43mm thanks to the wings or the flanks on the side of the case, the classic Nautilus design. And that's quite interesting because many watches have crown guards on the side of the crown, but none of them actually balance it out on the other side. This also serves as an interesting contrast because the dial of the watch is asymmetrical, but the case itself, it's not. It's completely balanced. And this balance of the case makes it wear really wonderfully on the wrist. It feels perfectly weighted and rather quite sleek on the wrist. The watch actually wears as if you're wearing a sort of a large coin on the wrist. That's how slim it feels. It's not the slimmest of watches, but at 8.6 millimeters or so in thickness, it's really slim. But the main highlight is the thinness of the bracelet. That's what gives this watch its wrist feel and presence. That's unlike any other. The feel is sort of smooth and almost soft, which is quite a contrast to something like a 15202 from AP, where that feels a lot more sporty and it's a bit more sharp-edged. This entire characteristic is given to the watch by its bracelet. But that brings me on to one of the negatives. The bracelet makes it feel somewhat dainty, delicate, and dare I say flimsy, particularly if the watch is used. It's not imprecise by any means, but the clasp is rather underwhelming. It's a press fit and I don't like the way you use it. This, along with the value of the watch, makes one really conscious of it on the wrist and conscious of not damaging it. The entire watch has that air of delicateness, which is not something you want to see in a sports watch. You're made way more conscious of this delicateness when you take it off the wrist because of the bracelet design. It doesn't lay flat on the table unless you put it on its side, and if you kind of give it any compressive force, it really feels like it would break quite easily. What do I like? Well, what do I not like? I find the aesthetics of this piece almost unparalleled. The dial is functionally beautiful because it really focuses on the functionality of the elements and not the layout. So the complications include a power reserve, a seconds subdial, and a date subdial with a moon phase in it. And that naturally has to be bigger because it contains more things. The second subdial doesn't need to be that large, and the power reserve just really needs to be a semicircle, which it is. Now, putting these three things in a dial of the same size as the 5711 is rather complicated, and particularly when these elements are differently sized, I don't think there could have been a better way of doing it. The movement on the backside is absolutely wonderful to look at. Another thing that's asymmetrical, like on almost every watch, this particular one has a micro rotor, which I love. I love micro rotors because you get to see the rest of the movement, and the rotor also looks kind of cool and thick on one side. And Patek, well, their finishing is what they're known for, so I don't think I need to cover too much on that. To me, this watch works as a hybrid wear, sort of dress wear watch. I wouldn't call this an out-and-out sports watch. It looks good with everything except for actual sporty clothes. Improvements I'd like to see would be in the bracelet department, but I don't think that's happening because that would actually change the way the watch feels on the wrist. At least the clasp. I think the clasp can definitely be improved. I really don't like the action on it. The bracelet would feel rather different if it was made in gold, which is quite likely going to happen. At least that's what happened to the 5711. The 5811 is the gold version of the same thing. And this one's still available in steel, but for how long, that's hard to say. The 5712 currently retails at under 60,000 US dollars, and the Mona Lisa retails at a bit more than that, but both are things you're not going to get at retail. So in the secondary market, these watches go anywhere between 80 and 140,000 US dollars, depending on whether it's more than 10 years old and used or brand new. So why is it a Grail watch? A lot of people call this their Grail watch. I'd say it's a Grail watch because of three things. It's a Nautilus with a moon phase, date, and power reserve complication. That in itself is a wonderful list, making it cooler than the plain 5711. It's exclusive and expensive. Inherently, a Grail is something high-end, which this is. It's not easily achieved, and for most people, this is the price of an expensive car and not really a watch. So for those reasons, mainly the exclusivity aspect and the gorgeous aesthetics, this is a Grail watch for many. Now here's why I think everyone loves it despite the asymmetry. The watch simply offers everything the 5711 has, but more to it. So the 5711, if you think of it as a beautiful symmetrical watch, this is sort of the anti-hero or antithesis to that watch because it has the same bracelet, case, general construction, not the exact same dimensions. But the dial itself is based on maximization and not perfection. If you call symmetry perfection, this is kind of the opposite. This is purely based on functionality and maximization, but somehow it's still so gorgeous. To think of it kind of philosophically, you can either seek perfection or you can seek maximization. You can't really have both. And this one aims to do more than the 5711. And I think that's the reason why it's loved despite the asymmetry.